All ready to go.
Okay, so welcome everybody to the annual general meeting of Moths and Butterflies Australasia. We're all around the country. I'm taking this call from Ngunnawal country here in Canberra, and I'm pleased to acknowledge the elders past and present for this region. We've got an exciting agenda leading up to a very exciting presentation this evening. So most of this I think will be just information and hopefully fairly quick map business, but we will have one point where we will be looking for you to provide your responses to a question later. I'm on the wrong page here, I think. Okay, so we have apologies from Axel, Marlene, and Marianne, and they're the formal apologies I've received, and I'm sure there are many others who would have liked to have been here this evening but have not been able to do so. The minutes of the last AGM were presented in newsletter number 5, and I think that's really just a matter for information, whether there's anything that anybody wanted to comment on those minutes.
We'll need somebody to accept them and to.
Okay, so we do need formally. Okay.
And to be.
I'm happy to move that they're true and correct.
Thanks very much. And do we have somebody to second that?
I'll second it, Donald.
Thanks very much, Cathy. Okay. The next item on the agenda would be a President's report, but unfortunately Axel is unable to be with us and was not able to send a report. So I'd like to move on to Tony's report, and he sent me some slides, and I'm trying to see where, okay, they've come through. So let me let's do it that way. 1 second. Okay, Tony, would you like to give your report?
I would love to, Donald. This shouldn't take more than about 45 minutes, I think.
Good. Okay.
So our financial accounting is actually available on the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission website for anyone who wants to read a little bit more. For this AGM, I took the reporting period as a little bit different from that. I took it from the end of the year, which was after our last annual general meeting. And it was the last month before we instituted membership fees, and carries on from the report that's on the ACNC website. We started the year with just over $7,600. Again, that should be shared somewhere. I'm not seeing it at the moment, but
oh, can't you see it? Sorry, my mistake. Sorry, I thought I was sharing the entire screen. I'll fix that now.
Membership dues have been our primary source of income, and to our primary account with a total of around about $3,500. Our second greatest income was from generous member donations, which came in at the same time, which was fantastic. And with certainly, I would encourage everyone to donate if they felt so inclined. We also have some book sales, donated books that have been sold, and that accounts for about another $500. At the time reporting, we had several participants signed up already for the 2025 MABA event, and that money will be set aside because that's not available to general funds. It will be used to cover costs and pay insurance for March next year when we have that event. Our major outgoing expenses are from the MABA website, accounting for nearly $1,000. some of our membership fees, which are paid by PayPal, also disappears. PayPal takes a small amount from that. It's still our most popular payment method. It's still worth doing, even though we do lose a little bit of money on there. The MABA biodiversity account received 2 generous anonymous donations last year, one of $40,000 for a one-off grant to evaluate Lepidoptera biodiversity taxonomy, which there'll be more detail in the Secretary's report, and that money has been awarded. And there's a second donation to support the transfer and development of the Butterflies of Australia website and app, and that is currently underway, and I believe we'll be hearing an update from Chris about that. And that is the end of the Treasurer's report. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Do we have any questions? Not seeing. Oh.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Would anybody like to propose accepting the report?
Yep, I will.
And seconded? Okay, I second it. Okay. Can you see the agenda slides here?
Yes.
Okay, good. I've managed to fix that part anyway. Okay, so thank you for that. We have a number of other reports, and I'll go round to the officers in turn to present their reports. Michael, Secretary's report.
I just need to share my.
Oh, sorry, I'll stop sharing. Okay, yep.
Okay. Is that coming through?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So this is a summary of the membership as of the end of August last month. So we currently have 192 members. And I've just given a breakdown of the membership across the different categories. So we have ordinary members, concession, student, member body, 2 patrons, and 1 honorary. And the other table just gives a breakdown across the globe, actually. So we do have members, quite a few members outside Australia, particularly New Zealand and in Europe and North America. Unfortunately, we had a few deaths to report. We lost Russell Mayo end of last year. There was quite a detailed obituary about Russell in the previous issue of MABA newsletter. But I also learned that Keith Wolf, one of our members from the United States, passed away last year as well, which is really sad. We received one resignation from Elaine from New Caledonia. However, since we introduced fees, we lost quite a few members. We lost about, I can't see that on my screen. Is it 90? 71, I think. Yeah, which I guess was to be expected. We thought we'd lose probably a third to maybe a quarter to a third of the membership with the introduction of fees. However, I still feel the membership is quite strong, and so we're pushing closer to 200, which I think is excellent. So that's all I wanted to say about the membership from the Secretary side of things, unless there's any questions.
That's okay. That's
Okay.
That's
So
the full report.
that's my full report, yes.
Yeah. Thanks very much indeed.
So yeah, despite we did put a lot of effort to try and recruit members when we introduced fees, and yeah, I did try really hard to try and get as many people back as possible, but I'm not, those last 70 I'm not going to worry too much about. I think yeah, basically just, yeah, quite a lot of people just didn't reply.
Yeah.
So
And we're left with the very, very best of all of them. Thank you all for coming.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you, Michael. So the next report is the editor's report. Can I hand over to David?
Yes, good evening, everyone. Lovely to see you all here. I'll just share my one slide. Right. So far we've produced 6 issues of the newsletter since MABA started, and here's some of the basic sort of stats in terms of the number of pages per issue and the number of contributed articles. And you'll see there's quite a bit of variation. There seems to be a bit of a dip every year. But on the whole, we're sort of cruising around sort of the high 20s, low 30s in terms of page numbers. Not to be too morbid, there's been quite a run of obituaries in the paper, in the newsletter, which is a bit sad and reflects probably an ageing cohort of lepidopterists in Australia and outside of Australia. And I'd like to offset that with articles that are not obituaries. And I feel like I'm still not seeing as many submissions as I should be seeing. And I'm very happy to take feedback on what's stopping members from submitting, whether it's they're intimidated by the content of a newsletter or they don't think their articles are interesting enough. But yeah, please come and give me more things, particularly around fieldwork and biology and identification. If you've got questions, if you've got a mystery image that you want looked at, I think all those things are things that could appear in the newsletter. And I'm also happy to take feedback on what members want to see and not see in the newsletter. So I don't get a lot of that at this stage. People seem to be pretty happy with it, which is great, but I'm always looking for improvements. And I think that's all I've got to say, unless people have got questions.
David, it's Angela from New Zealand here.
Yeah.
I think we would love to put something forward in each of your newsletters. So I think just maybe a reminder so that we can maybe forward something to you.
Yes. Okay. Well, I think I can lean on the secretary for that task. He's usually pretty happy to send out emails about that. One thing I have noted too is that we've had a few articles that we've republished from other sources. And I actually don't think that's an issue because the bulk of the membership probably hasn't had the opportunity to see those articles. But I think having fresh material is also great as well. Okay, well, happy to move on, Donald.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed. Cathy, can I hand over to you for the education report?
Yep. Indeed. Okay, right.
Yep.
So my report's pretty short as well. So there's 2 major things that were covered in my portfolio for the year, and that was that the first one is a taxonomic register. So I've been working on a taxonomic register for about the last year or so, and it's compiled of the following: taxonomic experts at family or subfamily level from members, taxonomic experts at family or subfamily level from friends of MABA, and taxonomic experts in different geographical areas. And it's really to provide a resource so that we can call on people to assist with identifications or advice or any kind of input into those particular areas. So that's finished. And the next step is for one of our patrons, Marianne Horak, to review the register. She hasn't done that yet. And then eventually specialists may be contacted regarding permissions for their names to be made publicly available. And I guess we'll think about how we're going to do that, whether we put it on the website or not. The other major thing that I've been concerned with is the Australian Lepidoptera website that's owned by the Coffs Harbour Butterfly House. This is the Don Herbison Evans site that is a really fantastic resource for Lepidoptera, or people that are interested in Lepidoptera, because it provides many images of species and also biological information about species as well. And it's a really fantastic website. We will, so one of the reasons for pursuing this was there was some concerns that the website was falling over, but we've since realised that that's not the case at all. But it works fine. But meanwhile, I corresponded with John Herbison Evans about our potential to maybe have some input and possibly hosting the site into the future. And he was supportive of that, and certainly very supportive of people having input into the site and providing images and information on different species. But he was more uncertain about us hosting it, because he thought that the Coffs Butterfly House, that we would have to approach the Coffs Butterfly House about that, which we did, and they were very. I certainly had a very productive conversations with them, and they're very happy for us to have input into the site. But at this stage, they still would like to own the site. So at this stage, it's just maintaining the status quo, and maybe in the future we may be able to look again at taking over the site if they ever wanted to relinquish control of it. At the last meeting, I think it was suggested that we compile a potential list of members to help curate the site. So that hasn't been done yet, but that's something that we're thinking about. So I guess for now the site's in secure hands, but we'll keep talking to the Butterfly House about the potential to take things further with that. Does anyone have any questions?
Okay. Thanks very much, Cathy.
I actually did have a question, Cathy, for those listening in who might be interested in that. What do they do if they want to put their hand up to help?
Oh, well, we haven't figured that out yet, I guess. I guess they can just contact maybe you, Michael, do you think? Should we go that far at this stage, or maybe send out an email at some stage?
Well, is it clear yet that Coffs Harbour are ready for that kind of input, or is it more a mooted thought?
I think they're always
okay
for input. You know, like people update the species pages all the time, so there's no harm with providing more images and input, I don't think. Yeah, so I think that would be absolutely fine.
Okay, great.
Mm.
Okay, back to Chris then for the conservation report.
I'll just share my screen. So I have 2 slides, and I was starting on the wrong one. So in terms of the conservation officer part of my my role, we had a few things that we were participating in as an organisation in the last year. Michael has mostly spearheaded these, but we've had some interest in our support for a number of initiatives around Agyrus subterrestris. There was some environmental watering projects going on in Victoria that were putting some of the populations at risk, and we were able to comment on that before it happened, and out of that they were actually able to leverage some monitoring funding, which they've subsequently done. And then beyond that, they've also been looking at getting the species declared as an icon species in Victoria, which would leverage more funding to do things like looking at the Camponotus ants and the potential relationship with the plant hoppers and things like that. So that would be a good thing if that goes ahead. And then Agaris petrina, we had been approached by one of our members with concerns that there was no formal monitoring being done on this species. So Michael wrote a very good letter that was sent to the minister. We did receive a response eventually, which was not super encouraging that they were going to be launching into action. But it is on their radar now. And then we were also asked to comment on very short notice on a new mining regulation that was being put in place that was likely to impact on species like Agaris petrina. And so Michael rushed a very last minute response to that through, but I read through it after the fact and was actually very insightful. So hopefully it was taken on board. And then finally, we've also been through the Butterflies Australia project, supporting the New South Wales government citizen science project on purple copper, which is it's starting off fairly slowly, but I think as we manage to ramp up Butterflies Australia, which will hopefully begin next year, we should be able to support them more, and particularly with recruiting people who are interested to get out and survey. I'm not too worried about the small numbers of people because it is a fairly short range endemic species. So there's only going to be a few people living within counting distance of the species. So if we can engage people on that local scale, it'd be great. And if anyone's a tourist who's going through the area and wants to contribute sightings, if they're there at the right time, that would be good too. So the other part of my role is overseeing Butterflies Australia. So we've nearly completed the move from ANU to MABA. The website is now back up and in MABA control. It's functioning as normal. We've actually also managed to fix a number of bugs that had been plaguing the project for a while because the developers hadn't been able to fix them. So we have a extremely talented volunteer who's now helping with the back end of the project, which is very much appreciated. The iPhone app is working properly, but currently the Android app is not available to download. So it should still be working if it's on your phone, but people can't currently download it from the App Store. And that's just some paperwork that I need to do to get it back up and reinstated. We do need volunteers to help run the project, particularly if we're hoping to grow it, which we are. And I think, you know, the key positions in the short term are going to be someone to help with social media, ideally someone to help with fundraising, because it is expensive to run a site like this. And we do need to get in and get some field guide updates done. And we have a number of experts who've offered to help with text, but we'll need also people to do editing and seeking out good quality photos and things like that. So there's always going to be things to do. We are up to 34,000 verified sightings, which is great. And much kudos goes to
sharing a crazy moment.
And Tony Moore, who are really carrying the bag on doing all the verification of these sightings. Sadly, as Michael mentioned earlier, we did lose, as David mentioned earlier, we did lose Russell Mayo very sadly. Russell was our lead moderator for the project, and we haven't really managed to replace him yet. But for now, we're managing, and we do have a number of other people who are willing to help out, and we just need to get back into gear with leveraging those people to be moderators. And as I mentioned earlier, we will look to relaunch the project next year. So while the technology is still working, I think it definitely needs a refresh, both of people running the project, but also you know, updating some of the content and just getting out there in social media and getting people involved again. And that's the end of my part. So if anyone had any questions, please ask. Otherwise, moving on.
Okay. Thanks very much, Chris. Any questions from anyone? Okay, the next item on the agenda is around the MABA grants. Sorry, Michael, are you speaking to these?
I can come back on that one. Yes, just hang on. Share. Try that one.
Yep.
Okay, so MABA actually looks after 2 grants. The first of these is the Australian Lepidoptera Research Endowment, which is actually run by Marianne Horak and Doug Hilton. And what's his name? John Stocker, former chief of CSIRO. So the 3 of those basically set this grant up some time ago. But MABA now actually manages the website. So we don't actually manage the grant, but we look after the sort of, I guess, the back end of that funding. And this year, and that grant is basically for taxonomic and phylogenetic research, specifically Australian, but I think there probably could be possibilities to go beyond Australia if groups occur outside the continent. And with a particular focus with material in the ANIC. This year they had quite a bit of money because there was no grants were funded last year. And they awarded 3 projects to Alberto Zilli, Peter Mackey, and Munjie Jin, based at the University of Melbourne. So we've actually now, if you look at our website, you can see quite a lot of detail about the MABA grant. So they had originally, it was on a different website that's now closed. And basically, as I said, MABA is now looking after the website for these ALRE grants. The other grants that we look after is the MABA Biodiversity Fund, which is a fund that we set up a few years ago. And that's primarily for biodiversity conservation research on moths and butterflies anywhere in Australasia. And this year we actually got a very generous donation of around 40,000. It was specifically for an early career research grant with particular focus on systematics, biodiversity conservation, and ecological interactions, and it had to be specifically on moths. And we had 3 very solid applications for that grant, and it was quite a process for us to go through the panel to assess those grants. But in the end, we decided that the project that really stood out was a project on the phylogeny and taxonomy of Australian Heliozelids by Munjie Jin again. And Munjie will give a presentation about that work next year at the Moths and Butterflies event in Melbourne in the end of March. So look forward to that. So that's all I wanted to say about the grants, Donald. I think the next one was for me to talk about the MABA event, which is the next slide. So maybe I'll just roll into that.
Yeah, just roll.
Okay, so as you may be aware, we're actually holding our next event next year in Melbourne. It'll be the 28th and the 30th of March. And most of the event will be held at the Field Naturalist Club of Victoria, the FNCV Hall in Blackburn, which is about 17k out from the city. We're planning to have 4 activities over that weekend, over that 3-day period. We'll be doing some light trapping and warrandyte at Pound Bend Reserve. And that'll be in conjunction with the Entomological Society of Victoria. We actually haven't decided whether they'll run the event or we'll run the event. It just really depends a bit on the public liability insurance stuff that we have to go through. So, but either way, yeah, I think that should be a very fun night. Then on the Saturday, we're planning to have a series of talks and the AGM, and Robert Hall will be our guest keynote speaker for that event. And that'll be followed by a dinner, a banquet dinner, which should be just across the road. It's a 5-minute walk from the FNCV Hall at Enrique's Restaurant. I've tested that restaurant out twice, and I can assure you that it's a really good venue. And then on the Sunday morning, we're planning to have a moth workshop similar to the one we had in Canberra last year. But this event will be divided into 2 phases. We'll do probably half the event. We'll probably spend an hour and a half just going through the setting, pinning procedures. And then the second half of that event will go through the identifications. So that'll be run by Axel Kelly, who's our president, and Andre Swick, who's the one of the taxonomists at the Australian National Insect Collection. Andreas actually has a manual that'll help us key moths out to family level. So it'll be fairly crude level of identification. I won't cover all the families, but it'll cover the major families that you're most likely to come across when you're collecting moths in the field. So yeah, we'd like as many people to attend. Already about 20 people have registered, so that's fantastic. But to register, you need to download this jot form, which is this link here, or you can do it through our website. It's a fairly straightforward form to fill out, but that needs to be done fairly soon. We'd like to lock in the date, lock in the numbers by the end of November. And there is a small fee, so to join this event, it'll cost you $35. That will basically cover our costs for the hall hire, and also will cover your morning tea, afternoon tea, and lunch. And if you wanted to stay for the banquet dinner, that's an extra $45. So I've got a bit of information on the website. Please do have a look at that. And yeah, we'd love to see as many of you there. The hall can take up to 70 people, so if we could get that number, that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
And that's all from me, unless there's any questions.
We're looking forward to the conference, Michael.
Looking forward to seeing you there, Angela, all the way from New Zealand. Yeah.
Thanks very much. No, that's very exciting. And for those of you who are looking for the link, if you go to the MABA website, it's under upcoming events. And if you scroll down, the URL for going and opening that form is there. So it should be fairly easy to find. Thank you. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is a proposed amendment to the Constitution. And this is the one item where we need to have a formal vote. Tony, did you want to speak to this?
Yeah, Donald, there should be a slide that I sent you. That would be the second
Okay.
slide.
Oh, that's the second slide. Got you. I was so pleased to manage to open the first one. I didn't look to see what else was going on.
Well ahead of me.
Okay, there we go. This one. Okay. Sorry, this is taking a second. Okay.
This is a fairly straightforward amendment, I think. We have deductible gift status, which means that any gifts that come to MABA are tax deductible. The government is concerned about environmental organisations in general, but they're particularly concerned about them passing on money to other organisations, which I'm sure all of you probably have your own favourite one that you like to do. However, we will not be doing that. And in fact, the government strongly recommends that we need to have specific wording in our constitution to say that we will not pass any donation, money or property to any other organisation, body or persons. So we are pretty well covered. When Michael originally wrote up this constitution, I think we were pretty well covered, but really to make sure that we maintain that tax deductible status, my recommendation is that we put the additional sentence, which is word for word what the Australian government has suggested. And yeah, I would hope that everybody will support that. It's nothing too controversial there.
Can we just
happy to take the question?
Can we just put up the amendment on the screen, Tony?
It's there.
It's there.
It's not coming up at my end.
Are others seeing it?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yep.
Sorry, Michael. I've got a slide. It's got it in red. The society. So under Article 15 on finance, it's an extra sentence. The society will not pass a donation of money or property to other organisations, bodies, or persons as a condition of donation. Sorry, yeah, I got the emphasis wrong again. It's weirdly worded, but as a condition of donation, the society won't be giving money away to others. So any questions or clarifications on this? Otherwise, I'll explain how we're going to poll you now for your views. I'll just stop sharing, and I'm going to hopefully this will work for any for whom this does not work. If you're able to enter comments in the chat, that'll be helpful. Otherwise, unmute yourselves and tell me you're having a problem. I'm going to share a poll that it confusingly contained two questions. You can ignore the second question. That was just an editing error on our part. Really, yeah, you can have fun with question 2 if you like. If you support the change to the Constitution, can you click yes for the first question? If you disagree with it for any reason at all, please indicate otherwise.
Worked just fine for me. Thanks, Don.
Good, thanks.
Me too, Don.
Since we've got, I think we've got 44 participants.
For me also.
Good, thanks very much, Urata. So I've already got 36 positive response, 37. I can't vote because I put it up, and that means I would say yes. So we're on 38 anyway. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
So
Thank you very much.
I'll end the poll, and there's the, for those who, if you should be able to see the results now, which is that we had 37 yes votes, no negative votes, and so this amendment has been passed. Thank you very much. Okay, I'll close that. Just go back to the agenda. Okay, so the next item on the agenda, and I'll share for this, is the around the election of office bearers. According to our constitution, we only need to vote on the office bearers and other members of the council if there are multiple candidates for any positions. We've not received more than one for any position, so this is really just to inform you on the nominations received and the state of the council. And I'll show you a slide in a moment that summarizes this. So first of all, we'd like to acknowledge and thank Ying for her contributions. She's now retiring from the council, and we thank her for her participation there. Kai and Andrea were nominated as new council members, and aside from that, we had nominations for the continued participation of the other 10 council members, which means that based on the constitution and the lack of and the absence of any need for a formal vote, the office bearers listed here are now elected as the council for the coming period. Are there any comments or questions on this from anyone? Did you have anything else you want to add to that, Michael?
No, that was good, Donald. The only thing I would just reiterate your comment about Ying. I think personally, I'd really like to thank Ying for taking on the role as a website officer. We really threw you into the deep end, Ying. I'm sorry about that, but look, you did a great job for those 2 years to get the website up and running. So yeah, look, just want to really appreciate the hard work that you've done behind the scenes. But other than that, yeah, no, I think I'm looking forward to working with Andrea. Andrea's on the screens. She's on up there somewhere. But yeah, welcome aboard, Andrea.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Additionally, we have an update to our patrons. According to the Constitution, MABA is able to or should have 2 patrons. With the sad loss of Ted Edwards, we had a vacancy, and Don Sands, who is also on this call or was earlier, I can only see 4 people at once, has generously agreed to become our 2nd patron. And if you don't already know about Don's illustrious career, I can't find it. I've got it open here somewhere. There we are. On the website, you'll find a lot of information about his very varied and exciting contributions to science and entomology. So welcome, and thanks for stepping forward, Don. Is there anything you would like to say at this point?
Thank you for nominating me.
Okay. Wonderful. All right. And I think finally, before we move to our keynote, and I'll stop sharing for this because I think Robert has something to share. We also have the nomination of a new honorary life member.
Can everyone hear me and see the slide?
Yes.
Yep.
Great. So many of you will be, sorry? Great. Many of you will be familiar with the wonderful George Gibbs, surely the greatest living lepidopterist in New Zealand. And we're proposing him as an honorary life member of MABA. He's the grandson of G.V. Hudson, another very famous New Zealand entomologist who wrote marvelous books about New Zealand insects, not least his beautiful Moths and Butterflies of New Zealand in 2 volumes. George himself is a fantastic systematist, field worker. He's incredibly good at illustrating, and of course he was a teacher at the Victoria University in Wellington until his retirement in 2012. And he's not just a lepidopterist, he's also done amazing work on our Orthoptera, the weta, and described new species of those. And he's an amazing biologist in general, working on life histories and quite detailed morphology. So he's published on a classic book on New Zealand butterflies in 1980, on weta 1998, the fantastic Ghosts of Gondwana about the extraordinary nature of the New Zealand fauna in general, and about his grandfather, G.V. Hudson, this book, An Exquisite Legacy. And amongst the Lepidoptera, he's most famous for his work on Micropterigids of the Southern Hemisphere and the endemic New Zealand family, Mnesarchaeidae, on which he's produced the most amazing revisions. I mean, with the Micropterigids, quite incredibly, he managed to describe the larvae of all 19 species in New Zealand. Which was just an extraordinary achievement, I think, for things which the larvae are almost never seen. So that shows his amazing dedication and brilliance as a lepidopterist. So that, I think, is all I've got time to say. But of course, I could say a lot more about George and his incredible contribution.
Thank you, Robert. Very exciting indeed. And I'm familiar with some pieces of that, and it is very impressive. Okay, sorry.
I think we probably just need to gauge the membership to see whether they support the nomination for life membership.
Oh, okay.
I'm happy to move that we accept it.
And do we have a unanimous approval?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You can, Peter?
Yeah.
So I think sounds like most people are in favour.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
Good. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Hi, Neville. Right. So thanks to everyone for that. We're very privileged this evening to have one of our council members and the Senior Curator of Zoology at the Tasmanian Museum and Art Gallery, Cathy Byrne, here to present to us, despite struggling through COVID, on I've lost the title. So I'll hand over to Cathy, but really looking forward to your presentation on the evolution of the Australian moth fauna.
Thank you very much, Donald. That was a very lovely introduction. Can everyone see the presentation okay? Looks like it? Okay. Lepidoptera are one of the largest groups of animals in the world and are one of the mega diverse advanced insect orders. The Australian Lepidoptera is very diverse and has many fascinating and different elements, such as a high level of endemicity, like many of our other animals and plants, interesting primitive groups, and species that are well adapted to an arid environment. Like many invertebrates, though, Australian moths are generally poorly understood and understudied. So after talking to you about our amazing fauna, I'm just going to briefly touch on the state of taxonomy in Australia and the role of museums in documenting biodiversity. Lepidoptera is an order of insects that includes moths and butterflies. It's about 180,000 species are described in 126 families and 46 superfamilies. Makes up about 10% of the total described species of living organisms. It's one of the most widespread and widely recognisable insect orders in the world. And they have many variations of the basic body structure that have evolved to gain advantages in lifestyle and distribution. They also represent one of the most successful radiations of plant-feeding insects, which predominantly took place with angiosperms beginning in the Cretaceous period. Now, apologies to all our butterfly enthusiasts, but even though we usually refer to Lepidoptera as moths and butterflies, I'm going to call them moths from now on, mainly because it's shorter and easier to say, but also because the families of butterflies are as closely related to other moth families as they are with each other, and are actually quite difficult to distinguish. So here's a quick quiz. Which of these species are butterflies? Now, you don't have to answer me now because we'll revisit it back at the end of the presentation, but you might want to jot down the relevant number and then I'll ask you at the end. There's 4 characteristics that are diagnostic for Lepidoptera, but scales are the first significant evolutionary innovation that changed the course of Lepidoptera evolution to make the order one of the largest and most successful groups of animals. These structures confer many advantages to moth survival. The first is insulation. Scales probably evolved initially for providing insulation. The scales on the thorax and other parts of the body contribute to manage the high temperature that the body temperature requires during flight. The solid scales of early moths weren't as efficient as those of their more advanced relatives, as the presence of a lumen, as you can see in that middle photo, adds air layers and increases the insulation value. Moths in cold places tend to be darker, and I've got a picture there of a beautiful mountain geometric moth that lives in mountains of Tasmania. So the dark patterns on the wings provided by the dark coloured scales allow sunlight to be absorbed and assist in thermoregulation. The scales can also be shed quite easily over a lifetime in moths, and moths can actually still fly with few or even no scales. But losing the scales also helps moths escape from spiders' webs. So it's not a problem. Moths are master of camouflage, which is essential for escaping daytime predators. The colours either due to striation of the surface caused by interference colours or to a lesser degree to the pigment they contain. The intricate and highly evolved patterns on moths can also act as deception for predators. Gum moths rest rhythmically and move their wings up and down, and the forewings forward, which exposes the large eye spot underneath. And in other big Saturniids, like the Atlas moth, the end of the wingtips actually resemble snake heads. Scales are also water repellent. and also act as a deterrent. So predators are more likely to peck at the eye spots, which deflects the damage from the body. Scales are also, brightly coloured scales are very useful for mate recognition, particularly in day flies. And of course, importantly, very important for aerodynamics. So the scales covering wings represent about 200 million years of natural selection for insect flight efficiency. And the unique microstructures reduce drag and increase thrust and lift during flapping and glided flight. And they also influence the flow of air over the wings, causing a smooth flow. So the second characteristic that's unique to moths is the proboscis. It's a key innovation to gain access to high energy foods such as nectar, sap, fruit, and honeydew, and to drink water. Moths and some butterflies as well can drink sweat and liquids from decomposing body, and also iron-rich water from soaks. It's also been suggested that swing hovering in hawk moths, which is observed especially when long-tongued hawk moths feed from flowers with a short corolla, is a predator avoidance strategy. Although some authors do question this hypothesis, recent work might support it. Epiphysis is also only found in moths, and that's used for cleaning antennae. And then there's prolegs. So prolegs are only found in caterpillars, or at least prolegs with claws on them. They can also be found. Prolegs are also found in other groups, but they're always distinguished in Lepidoptera by having crotchets or small gripping hooks. The Australian Lepidoptera has several very interesting characteristics. There's around about 22,000 species, and only half are named or discovered. There's only 400 butterflies, which are about 2% of the fauna, and that's probably because of Australia's arid environment and quite small areas of rainforest, which are less than 1%. There's also a lack of elevated areas and therefore reduced vegetation habitat complexity in Australia, so that probably also explains the low number of butterflies. We have a high proportion of endemic species, especially in the basal lineages, but most notably, we have an unusual domination of micromoths. There's around about 60% of micromoths when you take into account undescribed species as well. And the flora and fauna is Gondwana in origin. We have very interesting so-called primitive moths in Australia and a relatively rich fauna in the most basal lineages. These include the living families that are considered to be closest to the ancestral Lepidoptera, the so-called jawed moths. All of these belong to the suborder Homonura, which is distinguished by wings the same size and shape and the same number of veins in both. Lepidopterans evolved around about 200 million years ago, and the early moths would have resembled the jawed moths that exist today in the Microterigidae. Sister group of Lepidoptera is the Trichoptera, and they share several characteristics. As well as having jaws, females have 2 different sex chromosomes, similar wing venation pattern, and large silk in both the 2 orders. The major difference between the orders is hairy wings in Trichoptera, not scales. And early moths and caddisflies would have thrived in the warm environment of the Triassic. Unique among Lepidoptera, the microturridi have chewy mouthparts rather than a proboscis, and are often seen feeding in large aggregations on the pollen of the flowers of many herbaceous plants, shrubs, and trees. They reached their peak in the Jurassic and have survived almost unchanged since then. They're very diverse in the Southern Hemisphere. Sabatinka, that genus, is also found in the rainforest in Tasmania. They're most likely a Gondwanan group, as they're much more diverse in the Southern Hemisphere. They're not dependent on flowering plants like the higher Lepidoptera, and caterpillars probably most feed on liverworts and detritus. There's 2 undescribed species in WA and 1 in Tasmania. This photo of Sabatinka incongruella was taken from George Gibbs' wonderful publication on the family in 2014. Can't see all my slide, unfortunately, but I'll have to remember what I've written on it. So the larvae are quite slug-like and apodous. They don't possess any prolegs. But there's also another type. So this caterpillar belongs to what we call the sabatincoid caterpillars, but there's also another type of caterpillar in the microturridi called the microturrix type of caterpillar. And they actually do have abdominal prolegs and are fungal or detrital feeders and are subterranean. They actually live in soil, grass roots, and rotten logs. The Agathopagidea are probably the second most basal lineage, but the relationship to the microturridi is uncertain. But early molecular studies return a sister relationship between the 2 families, so the question's not fully settled. They're much less diverse than the microturridi. There's only 2 species globally, 1 in Australia and other in islands of the Southwest Pacific. The adult mandibles are non-functional in this family, and the larvae feed on the seeds of the carry pine that are poorly known. So this is a drawing of Agathophaga vitensis, which is found in Fiji, Vanuatu, and the Solomon Islands. And there's a photo of it there living in the actual seed pod of the carry. So in the late Triassic, another important evolutionary innovation evolved in moths, the proboscis. And that enabled moths for liquid feeding on energy-rich food. So it's most likely an evolutionary response to widespread heat and aridity during the late Triassic. Originally, it was probably used to suck up tiny amounts of sap, which plants produced, to eat pollen and to drink water until flowering plants evolved tens of millions of years later. The Lepidoptera underwent big changes and radiated extensively in the Cretaceous, corresponding with the explosion of diversity in flowering plants. One of the most successful radiations of plant-feeding insects. And angiosperm colonization is thought to underlie the evolutionary success of the Lepidoptera, because flowering plants provide an enormous range of niches for ecological speciation to take place. From here on, in evolutionary terms, the moth taxa are classified as Glossata, which includes the vast majority of species. Australia is a hotspot for the Hepialidae, which is the most successful Homoneurus family. There's around about 126 species. Larvae tend to feed underground on roots and also in burrows. The early instars feed on fungi first, and then begin feeding on roots or in burrows. They have a reduced proboscis, which indicates a short adult life. the moths mate quickly and then lay eggs. The Enigmatonidae was a new family that was discovered in 2015 by Dr. Richard Glatz. And this also is a basal group that belongs in the Homonura. This has larvae that are concealed feeders, and they feed on calitris. This family also, or the species in this family also has a secondary reduced proboscis. And at this stage, there's only one species in the family. And it was discovered on Kangaroo Island. Another interesting family of primitive moths that belong to the Homonura is the Lophocorinidae. And these are small primitive nocturnal moths that are restricted to Australia, but nothing much is known about their biology. There's only 6 species known, and most live in dry sclerophyll forests. The co-diversification during the Cretaceous of plants and moths led to a major shift to above-ground feeding by caterpillars on a wide diversity of flowering plants in open areas. And previously, as in the Hepialidae, underground feeding was more common. This corresponded with changes in wing size and shape, reduction in veins, and wing coupling evolved to allow greater maneuverability. From here on, moths are classified as the Heteronura, which means different veins. The Nepticulidae is the earliest of this suborder, and they most likely exploited early angiosperms. Above ground feeding on plants led to concealed feeding strategies such as leaf mining and stem and seed boring. But this particular family has about 280 described species, which is around about which is less than 10% of the fauna. It's very diverse in Australia. Before we move to the next major taxonomic group in Australian Lepidoptera, I need to set the scene for the diversity of the Australian Lepidoptera that we see today. The fauna has been mainly shaped by isolation, drying of the continent, recent proximity to Asia, and association with the flora, mainly eucalyptus and acacia. As Australia moved northward with the fragmentation of Gondwana, as Australia moved northward with the fragmentation of Gondwana, the climate became drier. Until then, the climate in Australia was moist and warm and mostly covered by a closed canopy rainforest. Australia has a very diverse fauna, but what really sets Australia apart is the very rich micromoth fauna. It's not surprising that the Microlepidoptera, with their concealed feeding in leaf mines, tunneling in stems, etc., protected larvae from desiccation, and it's no wonder that they outnumber the more evolutionarily advanced larger moths with their exposed feeding. Concealed feeding in the Gondwanan stock of species would have greatly favoured the survival of such groups in the drying Australian environment. The superfamily, the Gadoliniardia, are the most diverse superfamily, with the subfamily, the Egophorinae, the most successful taxon of the micromoths, and the most notable subfamily, Radiation Australian Lepidoptera. It's a very large subfamily with around 5,500 species, which is 20% of the known Australian fauna. But as at least 50% of Australia's Lepidoptera is still unnamed, and micromoths are overrepresented in that number, they're more likely to be as high as around about 60% of the fauna. However, they're still poorly understood and under-collected. Australia has a highly distinctive fauna dominated by eucalyptus and acacia. The radiation of the Egophorinae parallels eucalyptus. Around about 80% feed on eucalypts, with several thousand species feeding on dead leaves. They occur mainly in the southern half of Australia and are highly endemic. They're masters at making shelters. Gum leaves, especially when dead, are exceptionally low in nutrients. They're high in tannins and slow to decompose in a dry climate, but they're also exceptionally abundant. One study recently found 438 caterpillars per mean square metre of litter. Most studies on invertebrates that break down leaf litter have focused on moist litter. These larvae provide a unique service in decomposing dry eucalypt leaves. But they're very susceptible to fire. And this is a quote from Ted Edwards, because he was very interested in this particular group and in the effects that the fire regimes nowadays have on this fauna. And his comment is that fires kill the moths, well, particularly the fire regimes that are commonly put into practice. So his comment is, if we look at the Australian landscape through European eyes, perhaps we might do better to study the moths in breaking down the litter. Some dead leaf feeders have diversified onto other food sources, such as bird feces. With this particular relationship between the ant-bed parrot moth and the golden-shouldered parrot, the moth lays eggs in the termite mounds in which the endangered parrots nest. The caterpillars, after hatching, form a protective web beneath the chicks and eat their waste, keeping the nest clean. It's been demonstrated that the moths keep the baby parrots cleaner and the nests are less likely to be infested by flies. The Egophorinae aren't the only taxonomic group that have exploited dead eucalypt leaves. The Epitimbiinae in the Tortricity, around about 100 plus species, also exploit dead leaves. And that's a very unusual host for the Tortricity. And I, not that long ago, described this moth, Canania stephani, which is a geometrid in the tribe Diptychini, which also eats dead leaves. And I only found this out by accident when I was trying to rear the caterpillars from the moth, and it wouldn't. I was trying it on a whole smorgasbord of different hosts, but the only thing it seemed to prefer was the dead eucalypt leaves that I'd accidentally left in the bottom of the container. So I finally figured out that that's what it fed on. This moth is found in on the dolerite boulder fields of mountains in Tasmania. And so the leaves fall down into the crevices between the boulders, and that's where the caterpillars feed on the leaves. Regional diversity is also characteristic of the Australian fauna. The Incurviridae, another micromoth family, are most diverse in Australia, with over 100 species, and have radiated widely on eucalyptus. The Xylorictidae, which used to be classified underneath the Egophoridae, but it's now its own separate family, is diverse with 250 species in 46 genera, with many undescribed species, but it's mostly an Australian family. And they have become they actually have quite a wide range of diverse hosts, but are highly endemic family. Another highly endemic family is the Hypertrophidae, which has about 50 species in 11 genera and is associated with Myrtaceae. Small but very interesting families like Cyclotornidae is also restricted to Australia. It's a species that has some of the most remarkable life cycles in the natural world. Adults lay eggs along trails of meat ants, leading to Psychedelidae leafhoppers. The young larvae follow the trail to the hoppers and attach to the abdomen of its host. Later, they leave the host, spin a small fat cocoon, inside of which they molt to form a broad flat cocoon. The larvae erects its rear end to attract a wandering ant with alamones that will grab it and then carry it off back to the nest. There they reside as anteaters, appeasing their hosts chemically whilst preying on the latter's brood before pupation. When they mature, they leave the nest in the morning, accompanied by ants, and pupate in a crevice in a nearby tree. Half the butterfly genera are endemic, and the Trapeziinae, about 70 species, is characteristic of the region. So shows a very high level of endemicity in Australia. All families mentioned up to here have had larvae that are concealed feeders that feed in some kind of shelters, leaf miners, stems and root borers, detritus feeders. But the families that are at the top of the tree belong to the Macroheterocera, or the macro moths. That are the moth families that we're most familiar with, as they tend to be large, diverse, and widespread. Apart from the Echophoridae, they are mostly, in terms of species richness, the most successful of the 126 families of Lepidoptera. These families sacrifice shelter to become open feeders. This has some disadvantages in a dry climate, but moths tend to be larger and have more mobility, which means they can disperse better and find mates and food plants more easily. The trade-off is that they're more susceptible to predation. They are bigger targets as adults and larvae, but have evolved ways of dealing with these pressures. Most moths are nocturnal. Birds would have been a major predator, and wind currents decrease markedly at night. But at night, bats are a major predator. The simple ears have evolved in most of the macromoth families. In the geometras, pyralids, and drepanids, they're at the base of the abdomen, whereas in the Noctuidae and Erebidae, they're in the thorax. They're simple structures, drum-like, with a tympanic membrane stretched over a rim. In the Sphingidae, they're found on the proboscis. But it's an evolutionary arms race with bats. Bats evolved echolocation calls to hunt moths at night, but moths can hear the highest frequency of any sound of any animal, so they evolved ears to detect the bat calls. There's a really fascinating story of evolution between the bat, the moth, and the mite. So the moth ear mite colonizes the ears of noctuid moths, but it's only ever found in one ear of the moth. This is a highly evolved parasitic relationship, ensuring both the survival of the moth and the mite. If the moth has one functional ear, it will still be able to detect the calls of the bat. And the mites even lay a pheromone trail that guides newcomers to the infested ear so that only one ear stays infested. Modern distributions give us some idea of the evolutionary history of the drying of the continent and the changes in distribution of species because of that changing climate. Present-day distributions of moths reflect previous climate changes caused by the gradual drying of the continent as it moved north, causing the retreat of moist environment adapted groups to the continental margins in the south and the east. Some of the most remarkable disjunctions between the mesic southwestern corner and the tropical northeast of the continent hint at the early tertiary rainforests which spanned Australia prior to the Miocene. The distribution of the Drepanidae, a very small family of moths in Australia, is a striking example of this. This lovely species, also on the logo of our association, is found in northeastern Queensland, whereas the other two species occur right down in the mesic southwest of WA. Distribution of this beautiful genus in the Geometridae called the satin moths, which Fabian and I are currently revising, also appears to reflect this history. The two groups here can be clearly separated on genitalia, internal anatomical similarities, but these can also be divided on geography. The original elements on the left live in their more favoured coastal climates, in contrast to the other group of species that lives in the arid interior. Populations that lived originally in rainforests were forced to recede from drying areas. Some elements evolved to be better adapted physiologically to nutrient-deficient soil and increasing aridity, and these radiated widely to explore the habitats unfavourable to the original rainforest fauna. The caterpillars of this group also reflect the differences in their adaptations to environments. So Phalaena selenea here is most likely close to the ancestor of the group, and it feeds on blackwood, which is a rainforest species, whereas the more derived species feed on dry, arid interior plants. The genus Phalaena belongs to the Gondwanan group, the Diptychini. Once thought to be primitive because the caterpillars often have extra prolegs, which is unusual in the geometrids. They usually lack prolegs along the body. But it's another example of the HOX gene controlling appendages that can be quite plastic in animals. So this is another group that's widely radiated on eucalyptus. In Australia, the Geometridae are the dominant family in the tree canopy, which is unlike the Northern Hemisphere, where Noctuids tend to be the dominant family. This group is highly endemic and has a Gondwanan distribution. And like many of the other micromoth families, some families of the Macroheterostera are also highly endemic, such as the Catheidae, which is restricted to a single species that lives in southern Western Australia. And also the Anthillidae. There's 9 genera and 94 species that are, it's restricted to Australia and New Guinea. And this family actually has quite diverse food plants. Inosandridae is also restricted to Australia with 4 genera and 8 species. So now I'd like to talk about taxonomy and first of all, the gaps in knowledge and our knowledge of Australian Lepidoptera. So as I've talked about, the Echophorinae is the most diverse taxon with around about 25% to 60% of Australia. But the biology of this group is poorly known and has a very large number of undescribed species. However, there is some work being done at ANIC at the moment on the higher classification of this group, which really needs to be tested in a phylogenetic and global context. The Neptuculidae is another group that's poorly known. Only 10% of the fauna are described. And also the Psychidae. The immature stages in the biology are very poorly studied and poorly collected in that particular group, but it's being worked on at the moment by Ethan Beaver from ANIC. Immature stages are poorly known across the board in Australia, our knowledge of the fauna would benefit greatly from more work in this area. It's a particular concern to biosecurity, who need to identify larvae as they come into Australia. So this particular key was constructed a few years ago in order to assist with that. Scientific community and conservationists, at least, have long realised the importance of Australia's natural ecosystems and documenting biodiversity so that we can estimate species abundance and distribution. But with climate change now affecting humans and the general public are voicing their concerns about the degradation of ecosystems to the extent they're finally being valued in economic terms and are recognised for the services they provide to humanity. Even the Minister for Science in October last year launched the Threatened Species Action Plan towards zero extinctions, pledging no more extinctions. But how can we properly value our ecosystems and or protect them if we don't know what lives in them? In Australia, around 70% of all plants, animals, fungi, and other organisms have yet to be discovered, documented, named, and classified. But it's a global problem. The vast majority of biodiversity remains undescribed, leaving us dangerously ignorant because most species are largely inaccessible for ecological studies and biodiversity inventories. There's three fundamental ways of gaining knowledge of nature: naming undescribed and new species, documenting species occurrence and distribution, and undertaking surveys to discover new species, new records, and rare species. Collections are very important in providing permanently maintained specimen-based records of species and the distribution in Australia, because they provide baseline and temporal diversity data that are needed to inform policy decisions and the conservation of species and the management of ecosystems in Australia. The main collections are held in 11 state museums and also 3 CSIRO collections. Also, there's good collections of insects in Department of Agriculture collections. The Atlas of Living Australia is the national biodiversity data infrastructure, and records of species are published online on that particular website. However, most of these records by far are observational records, and only a fairly small percentage are actually based on specimens. There's over 33.3 million objects specimens in collection, but only around about 50% of those are data-based and therefore available online. So projects like Bush Blitz have been very important in discovering new species, new records, and rare species, and to actually provide good resourcing of surveys, enabling scientists of all disciplines to undertake field trips in Australia. It's increased our knowledge of fauna immensely. It also provides funding for systematic work and good community engagement to publicise the importance of this work. So these particular surveys are led by museums, and there's been quite a few in Tasmania, led by TMAG. So this is an example of a few of the blitzes that have been in Tasmania. So just giving you an idea of the species that are found and the new records and extensions of the distributions of species. So on Stony Island, and also pretty recently on King Island. But last but not least, taxonomy. The need for taxonomy to be better resourced in Australia is the most critical impediment for unlocking biodiversity data. We need more taxonomists to describe and identify species. The state of science in Australia, the state of science of taxonomy in Australia was recently published by the ABRS in 2016. And it found that the number of taxonomic researchers has fallen since 1975. Taxonomists are ageing, with field supported substantially by retired or honorary taxonomists. Over a quarter of the workforce are in unsalaried positions, and there's an extreme lack of positions for postdoctoral researchers and beyond. The Taxonomy Australia Decadal Plan identified, when they published their decadal plan back in 2018, that it will cost $1 billion to have all species named in generation, which is about how much that the new Hobart football stadium will cost. So, and there are initiatives for putting more resources into taxonomy, but few and far between, and we really need more. Would anyone like to hazard a guess at which of these is not a butterfly? Sorry, which of these is not a moth?
Number 2.
Yeah, number 2.
Anyone else?
None
Number
of them.
2? No, none
Yeah,
of them.
none of them.
Yes, thank you. None of them. They're all actually moths. So number 2 belongs to the family Uraniidae, which are very butterfly-looking moths. But yeah, so I don't blame you for thinking it was a butterfly.
Just shows how incredible they are.
Indeed. And I want to say thanks to Ted Edwards, who's been my mentor for many, many, many years. And we greatly feel his loss. And a lot of the knowledge that all of us have is based on Ted's amassing of knowledge over the last many decades. So I'd just like to say thank you to him. Right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. That was marvelous.
And thank you so much. So we have a few minutes if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask Cathy.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Carol.
Are we able, thank you very much. That was a very interesting talk. Are we able to access the caterpillar
key? Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Just Google the caterpillar key and you'll get to it.
Thank you.
Now this key, it was constructed by myself and a colleague. Make sure you read the introduction first. It's very, very important to read the introduction. It's only a key down to families because anything more than that would be an enormous amount of work. And you need to don't be put off if you only get down to, say, a few families, because that will still enable you to then go further afield to try and figure out what your caterpillar is. So sometimes it's necessary to use characteristics of the caterpillar that are very difficult to see, for instance. But it's just one of the tools that you need or that you can use when you're identifying caterpillars. And you can always contact me too. I'm very happy to help with identifying caterpillars.
Thank you, Cathy.
I can't see many people. If anybody's got another question, shout out.
I have a question, Cathy.
Yes, Michael.
Yeah, you touched on the hepialids earlier, and I think I might have missed this point, but what made them so, or what's made them so successful evolutionary? Why?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Why have they done so well? Given that they're odd moths, that they don't live for very long, and they have, I think you mentioned they have a shortened proboscis.
Yeah. Oh, well, they don't feed. As a general, they don't feed. Yeah, I mean,
they seem to have a lot of species, and they seem to be quite a dominant component of the fauna. Yeah,
they are. It's probably because they were able to exploit, a reasonable range of food sources. So, they burrow into roots, into stems, and they also feed on grass as well. So grass is a big food source for hepialids. So it's probably to do with that. I mean, I don't know whether anyone else has got any insights into that. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that we really know why they're so successful, but it's possibly to do. I mean, they've evolved for a long time. They've been around for a long time, so I guess that makes a difference as well. They evolved early.
How does our fauna compare with, say, South America? Do they have a comparable fauna, or do we have a proportionally higher number?
We've got proportionally higher, so it's a real hotspot of diversity for hepialids in Australia. Yeah. Is Peter McQuillan there? Have you got any ideas, Peter?
I was wondering, a lot of the large ones like Apentides, have a very synchronous emergence after rain in autumn.
Mm.
And the timing of those rains is very, very random. You know, it could be any time between, say, March and May in many parts of Australia. And I wonder if populations in some places emerge, they can just breed with the local individuals, perhaps become a bit inbred, but 200 kilometres away, you know, the the autumn rains arrive a month later, and so there might be a lot of you know, quite random variation and geographical isolation of populations that eventually, you know, diverge to become discrete species. Also, their association with fungi when they're very young, you know, when they first emerge as first instars, they're living in the litter layer. So they have to successfully find litter, consume enough to then go to the later instars, establish a burrow. All of these things make them quite unusual relative to other moths, I think. John Green in New Zealand did some terrific work on Anetus probably 30 or 40 years ago now. And John worked out that there were what he called a transfer stage larva. So the eggs are dropped on the ground, they're not attached. And so the young larvae have to go into the litter, feed on fungi, and then at some stage transition to a larva that climbs a tree or a shrub stem, and then establish a burrow or a hollows out a retreat, and then feeds on the bark. So they've got these you know, unusual and rather complicated lifestyles. But having said that, something like frowse, you know, which eats my lawn every year, you know, it's actually got a rudimentary proboscis. That they're quite primitive Hepialids. It may even be a different family, possibly frowse. But there's been some very strange new species turn up in Western Australia. I think one of which was described not long ago. But apart from just the one species, Frowse simulans, I think none of the life histories of any other species are known at this stage.
Yeah, I think you're right. I was looking at it fairly recently, actually, just trying to figure out whether there was much known about Frowse, and I could only find information about simulans, which of course can be a pest, so that's why we've got information about it. Yeah, so it's just a complicated life cycle, but yeah, it's just
another insight of her, mate. Can you hear me, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, look, some of the larger Abantades are incredibly swift flyers. I've had the rare opportunity to observe these things in twilight before dark in flight, and I was shocked at how fast, for example, Abantades marsitis can fly. And I suspect that they have very efficient mate location abilities. And then, of course, the females scatter many hundreds of eggs. So it's sort of, they're in their process of procreation. I think they're extremely efficient, and they've kind of arrived at an ecological niche that they just fill beautifully, and have been able to evolve into a whole series of species and become a very successful group. And also because of the subterranean larvae, of course, they're beautifully adapted to more arid climates as well as wetter ones. So they're just a remarkable group.
Well, they've obviously they're obviously really successful. So all that combination of characteristics has made them survive really well and diversify really prolifically.
Absolutely.
The other possibility is they might go extinct slowly, so that you know, when every species has a sort of a lifespan on a geological scale, you know, they evolve, they flourish, and they go extinct. Hepialids might simply go extinct at a very slow rate relative to other moths. So the numbers of species in an environment or a continent accumulates, and so there might be something about Australian conditions that actually, you know, cause Hepialids to go extinct at a slower rate than other groups of moths, perhaps.
Yeah, and I guess the caterpillar is protected for such a long time as well, isn't it? Like it grows slowly and it's protected, and it's only the moth that gets exposed, I guess, really.
Yep.
Yeah, as Peter mentioned earlier, the synchronized emergences also overwhelm predators, which is another marvelous way of dealing with predation of the larger
Yes, yes, magpies can only eat so
species.
many
They all
each morning,
emerge
can't they?
synchronized. And
Yeah.
Very interesting. Great,
Actually,
fantastic family.
If I
Wonderful.
had a question for you, Cathy, one of your slides there towards the end has that, that rather depressing detail around the lack of investment in taxonomy in Lepidoptera. But one point of leverage might be, if we get more species of Lepidoptera on threatened species lists, which are largely state-based, and you can probably talk to this in more detail, Cathy, because I know you've been on one of the committees, but some states have, excuse me, a reasonable number of Lepidoptera on their threatened species lists, and once they're listed, of course, that does drive some investment in distribution data and biology and all that sort of stuff. But some of the states haven't, I don't think, any at all. I don't think South Australia does it, for example?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, gosh. Yeah. It's.
I think they are looking at listing some species as we speak.
Right.
Andy?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So and we've got some internationally listed, and they will probably be making their way through the state system, and also through the new EBBC stuff. So I've actually been getting some photos together for the cover of that document. So yeah, there will be.
I think Don's trying to say something, but Don, you're muted. Don, you're muted. Don Sands, you're muted.
Wait a minute.
Someone needs to ring him.
Doesn't seem to be able to hear anyone. Maybe we should try. Don. Yeah, you've been muted, Don. Yeah.
Cathy, you discussed an important species early on, Agatha and I'm wondering why we aren't recognising the extremely important conservation status of that moth, considering it was lost for a long, long time. In fact, Ian Common, I think, collected the last one in 1959 as a specimen. Just in the last 2 or 3 years, I've provided Andrea Swick with a number of immature stages, which is confirmed as that species.
Wow.
We've been looking very closely at its breeding habitat, which seems to be only the remnant old growth agathis, which occur on the Sunshine Coast. There's only about 6 trees left in the Rainbow Beach area. And I think that this species, because of its lineage and also its rarity, should be upgraded in its conservation significance extremely soon, if possible.
Okay, another one that needs to be listed.
So that's, and the other thing is, connected with that, we've got at least 3 other species of agathis in North Queensland. We haven't got a clue which Agatha farga might be in those seeds as well. The whole group, because of their primitive nature, I think, should be raised in importance to study the taxonomy, to investigate the host ranges, and to have a look at their conservation status.
Good point, John. Robert?
Yeah, just following up. Yeah, just following up from that, I think I read somewhere that a possible second species of Agatha farga had been photographed somewhere in Australia, but no specimen existed. Do you know anything about that, or does anyone?
Oh, I think, as I say, the last specimen I think was collected in 1959 in Rainbow Beach. But in the last 2 or 3 years, I've been collecting larvae. Unfortunately, they have up to 12 years larval diapause, and it makes them very difficult to rear. I did manage to get a few to a close, but they didn't spread properly. You'd have to be waiting patiently for years to see what was cracking the diapause. But all that work needs to be done, I think, on this species before it's too late. Anything could happen to those few trees. I'm sure that species Agatha farga is adapted to really old growth trees. I suspect that the adults feed on probably the male spores of the tree. Since the adults have been collected at the same time those spores are there, And I think the whole ecology of the insect needs to be looked at very carefully before it's too late and we lose the lot. It certainly lies dormant in leaf litter at the base of the old growth trees, and disturbance occurs a great deal, of course, both in national parks and in other protected areas where the leaf litter is necessary to be kept intact for them to develop and finally pupate and produce moths after such a long time in their pre-pupal stage. I just think, I'm sorry about all those little bits of detail, but I think it brings forward the necessity to put this high on the list of conservation significance, particularly because of primitive nature.
Yeah, I think, Robert, that there was a specimen photographed up in Atherton, somewhere around there, a few years back, which could possibly be a second.
Well, it could be another species because we've got 3 different agathis up there. Have they all got the same moth? The other one's in the Pacific. So at the moment, we've only got 2 species. One of them's in Fiji and Vanuatu, and the other one's in Australia, but it's not really known if there's only 1 species. That just hasn't been investigated. I think it's terribly important someone does it.
Thanks.
All right.
On a related but different subject, has anybody investigated the natural occurrences of the Wollemi pine for relictual species at all?
Does it have its own moths?
Yes, exactly.
I think our late beloved weevil specialist, Willie Cushel, tried very hard to get his hands on some Wollemi pine seeds to see if he could get any weevils out of them, but he failed to persuade anyone to to send him anything. So
Okay, well, thanks for that wonderful discussion, and thanks again to Cathy for the presentation, which I'm sure we all greatly appreciated. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining us for this call and staying on for an hour and 3/4 nearly. It's been a real pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you at the upcoming meetings, and particularly the hope that many of you will make it along to Blackburn for the face-to-face meeting next year. Thank you.
Thanks, Donald.
Yeah, thanks, Don. Thanks, Cathy. See you, everyone.